Episode 14 of the WildFed podcast, Funding Wildlife Conservation with Richard Zane, is brought to you by Surthrival. Surthrival's Yaupon tea is sustainably and ethically wild harvested right here in the USA. Yaupon is the only caffeinated plant native to North America and presents a unique opportunity to replace imported morning caffeine drinks with a local, healthy, wild alternative. Surthrival's medium roast Yaupon has smooth and mild flavors with caramel undertones and is most similar to yerba mate in flavor profile. The dark roast has a stronger, richer flavor and is the most coffee-like. Add a spoonful of pastured butter and a touch of maple syrup and you've got yourself a creamy, latte-style drink that will fuel your day with clean, sustained energy. Now through Friday, January 31st, save $10 on a bag of Surthrival's medium or dark roast Yaupon, or get a free bag of Yaupon with any purchase of $100 or more at surthrival.com. No coupon code is required, available while supplies last. America's indigenous stimulant is back. Find it at surthrival.com. For those of you that ordered Season 1 of the WildFed TV show, you received Episode 4 yesterday. That episode, Alien Invasion in the Urban Jungle, takes place in the Florida Keys, where deleterious non-native green iguanas are outcompeting native wildlife and tearing up urban infrastructure, and where ripe coconuts, ignored by the locals, sit idly on ornamental palm trees. We harvest both species and bring them back to Maine to serve at my annual solstice party. If you've never seen someone catch, clean, and cook iguanas, you won't want to miss it. If you aren't currently subscribed to the show, go over to wild-fed.com to purchase Season 1. 4 episodes are available to watch today, and you'll receive a new episode each Monday until all 8 episodes have been released. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Today's show is with Richard Zane of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who talks to us about the North American model of conservation and how federal funds collected as excise taxes on hunting and fishing equipment have been funding wildlife research, habitat restoration, and conservation efforts since the late 1930s. You'll also learn about how the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service uses those funds to increase opportunities for hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation. Whether you hunt and fish or just care about wild animals remaining on the landscape, this interview will help you understand how our revolutionary model of wildlife conservation is able to provide hunting and fishing opportunities to all 327 million Americans and our non-resident guests too. Be sure to tune in next week for an interview with one of our most requested guests, hunter, forager, botanist, and Maine guide Arthur Haynes, who we interviewed after a wild rice harvest and black bear hunt we did together for episode 6 of the WildFed TV show. Until then, get yourself up to date and in the know on how hunters and anglers have been funding wildlife conservation for decades, and how you can help keep wild animals in wild places right here in North America. All right, well, I am sitting here with Richard Zane. Tell us where we are, Richard.
We're in Hadley, Massachusetts at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Region 5 office. We cover the 13 states here in the Northeast region.
And I'm also here with Grant Giuliano,
hey,
our
everybody.
producer. All right. We first met at one of Maine's R3 meetings, so Maine's sort of exploring the R3 program. And I think we were seated over by you, and you told us about your job here, and I was really eager to interview you and talk a little bit about what your role here is, and also sort of the role of the federal government in wildlife restoration and habitat restoration. So we've spent a couple of months trying to get sort of set up for a time we could meet, and here we are. Tell us about your job here and what the agency does.
So I work under the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Program within U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have multiple programs within our agency that do various different types of conservation work. But in my program, I'm in charge of hunter education grant programs, aquatic resource education grant programs, shooting range grant programs, tribal wildlife grants, and the R3 grants that are now coming out from many states.
Tell people what R3 is, just so that we kind of start off with that, because that's obviously how we connected, and I think something people are going to be hearing more about.
Yeah, so R3 is I don't know if I would want to call it a new movement, but there's a lot more emphasis put on it now. It's to recruit, retain, and reactivate people into hunting and fishing. We've seen declines in people participating in hunting, and a smaller percentage of the population actually fishing. So their states are trying to engage people and get people to reconnect with nature and participate in these opportunities.
How significant are those declines? I probably don't know off the top of your head, but is fishing more stable than hunting?
Fishing is definitely more stable as far as the numbers go, but the population is growing at an exponential rate in this country. So the numbers may stay the same, but the percentage of the population
people who are not participating is growing.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
And then hunting is more precipitous. It's dropping.
Yes, it is. It's continuously dropping, and I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head.
Do you know if that's in every state?
Yeah. I mean, it's been in every state. I think a few states are now, with this R3 movement, are starting to stabilize the numbers of hunters. Might see a few states that will increase across the country. But overall, there has been a decline in the national surveys.
And for the average person, I'm imagining a person who is early on in their initiation into the world of hunting and fishing, or maybe is not part of that, listening to this and thinking to themselves, well, that seems like a good thing because, we hear so much about endangered species and threatened species and so much concern about environment and habitat. And it would seem to some people like, well, that's a good thing. And so maybe explain for folks why it's important that we keep those numbers not just stable, but actually bring them back up a little bit.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of confusion between endangered species and species that are on decline and a lot of the species that we actually go and harvest. Mm-hmm. And our agency actually works with both species, but we actually use hunting as a population management tool. Especially in the east here, where we're in this region, a lot of the larger predators are no longer on the landscape, and so deer populations, for example, can grow astronomically without the pressure from people participating in hunting. So that actually helps keep the balance a little more in check. Where I worked at Canaan Valley National Wildlife Refuge, when I worked for the refuge system in West Virginia, we could see the browse line for the deer were overpopulating, and a lot of the native vegetation wasn't able to grow.
They just mow it down at a certain height. Okay.
Yeah, and you end up with a monoculture of ferns, typically in those environments, which isn't the most diverse for all the other species that are using that habitat, like migratory birds and other species that may be declining.
And what about from a financial perspective? Because it seems to me that that's a piece where I have big concerns about these drop-offs, because it seems to me that so much of the field work being done is funded, at least largely by hunter participation, hunter money, or money that's indirectly spent on hunting and fishing.
Yeah, it is. If you look at the main act that I worked on, the Wildlife Restoration Act, is passed in 1937. We were seeing market hunting having a huge toll on all the species. Like deer are almost wiped out in the east, and a lot of the sportsmen came together.
Well, can we flesh that out a little bit too? Because that idea of market hunting, I think, is really crucial for people to understand, because sometimes people associate declines in species with hunting and don't realize they're talking about market hunting, which was widespread and led to decline. Everything from whales to beavers to many species of fish today are still actually, we still have, wild fish species, marine animals ending up at market. But this is people who are hunting, selling selling these animals into the marketplace, and that was being purchased by consumers, correct? So that's as opposed to modern hunting today.
Yeah, so a long time ago, when the settlers originally came, it was market hunting. They would, harvest buffalo and sell them at the market.
Wild animals.
Nowadays, you can't do that. It's actually illegal. The animals, the wildlife, I'm not talking about marine fish, because that's a little different.
It's its own category.
But the wild animals on the landscape belong to the people. They belong to everybody. That's the North American model. So those animals cannot be harvested and then sold at market.
You would essentially be stealing from everybody, in a sense, right? So that, I think that's an important idea for people too, is that the deer that steps onto your property is owned collectively in trust by the people, even though you control access to the property at that time that the animal is there. You don't actually own that animal until you tag that animal, right? Like if I shoot a deer legally and I get it tagged at the tagging station, now it's my deer, right? But previous to that, it belongs to all the people, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
That's accurate the way I'm saying that?
Yeah, that is. And, and you are, by buying a license, you're basically getting permission from the public, because you're going through the state agency to harvest.
I think that for a lot of people, they don't understand that. And so it reframes the conversation quite a bit when you realize, oh, I'm a stakeholder.
Just by being, I've heard it like that.
So okay, like cool. By being a citizen here, you're a stakeholder in this. Like these are your animals too. And so that's really fascinating. But the market hunt also, I mean, it did push animals like the passenger pigeon right to extinction, which is just a remarkable story. Yeah. And then there was like a wake-up call, right? And people realized, hey, we can't hunt for the market anymore.
Yep.
And this is around the 1930s that this started happening.
Yeah. So the Wildlife Restoration Act was actually the first one that came around. I'm just shuffling through a few papers here to make sure I got it right. But in 1937, it was put on by the Senator Key Pittman of Nevada and Representative Will Robertson of Virginia. That's why we call it PittmanRobertson Act also.
Okay, because I hear it like that most often, but it's actually is it the Federal Wildlife Restoration Act? Is that
the Wildlife Restoration Act.
Wildlife Restoration Act. Okay, so explain how that works.
So in 1937, they approved this act, and basically what happens is the manufacturers of firearms, ammunition, they pay an excise tax at the industry level. They'll pay that tax, and that goes into a trust fund. That trust fund is eligible to be used for wildlife restoration purposes by the exclusively for state agencies only.
Okay.
And one of the things that was really cool about this act is they included some language in there that says, and I'll explain what it means in a second, is in which shall include a prohibition against the diversion of license fees paid by hunters for any other purpose than the administration of said state fish and game department. So that is what we call assent legislation. Basically, that means that your license fees, when you pay for hunting, can only be used by that state wildlife agency.
Okay.
It cannot be used to build roads and other things.
Right.
So it's really keeping that money, and that's part of my job, is making sure that money is being used for wildlife restoration and no other purposes.
Okay. Has there been any problems with the states ever on that, or has that been something that people have stuck to pretty voluntarily?
I think, they know there's oversight from the federal government on it.
That's kind of my question. There's good oversight on this.
Yeah, and we have a great relationship with our states. I don't think if we weren't here, there probably would be more pressure
right.
To use it in other fashions. Right. But yeah, I think that's a lot of our job is to make sure that we're using it all appropriately for the purposes of the act.
And then going back, this idea, when I read in the Maine, I'm from Maine, so when I read the law book, it'll say things like let's see, you can bring a person with you who does not have a hunting license, and they can assist you on the hunt, but they cannot carry hunting equipment. And then it defines hunting equipment as, firearms, archery equipment, and things like that. So just so that people understand, when we're talking about hunting equipment, we're not talking about backpacks or tents or boots, right? We're talking about firearms. Are we talking about bows and arrows and arrowheads and things like that?
So a lot of the components of a bow, so the shafts, arrowheads, the bows themselves, I think it's a 35-pound draw weight or greater, so it does not tax the youth bows.
Oh, that's cool.
That was just one of the things put in the act.
Keep those costs down.
Yeah. So it kept those costs down.
Or imagine a lot of competitive archers and things like that too, even.
Well, yeah, but if those go above 35,
above 35, gotcha.
Yeah, they're taxed as well. So,
but interestingly, if I understand it, it's all firearms, correct? Or
it is now. Originally, it was just more long guns, but actually, when handguns got included into the act, that's when they included hunter education into an eligible use of funds. So not only do you do wildlife restoration, but now that they've brought in taxes from handguns later and then archery equipment as well, Now
those came on board later as well.
They came on board later.
Okay. So this is an interesting component too, just sort of a little rabbit trail, but I always think about how the anti-gun or gun restriction conversation often leaves out this key component, because it's easy for someone to say, well, I think they should ban, handguns, whatever, however, reduce sales of handguns. And it's like, well, okay, we need to account for that if you're going to say that, because that money is taxed, or those products are taxed, and that money goes into this fund we're talking about. And you might not see it when you're thinking about, I don't like to see, handguns being carried around by people. They might not realize they're also then inadvertently talking about diverting money away from conservation, right? So I feel like that's often left out of the conversation with firearms. It's like, as a firearms advocate, for me, very often there's this component of like, hey, we're in also by buying a handgun or by buying I bring up handguns just because we don't often hunt with them. So it would be true of rifles, it's true of shotguns, it's true of handguns. But I'm saying the person who does not necessarily hunt with their firearm, who's maybe a hobbyist, an enthusiast, a self-defense person or something like that, they're also inadvertently funding wildlife restoration, correct?
They are. Like I said, it's excise tax on all ammunition, all firearms, and really archery equipment. And we put a lot of money into shooting ranges now. Yeah. So there are things that those people are paying into
that they're getting back.
But they are getting back. We're finishing up one in Maine, in your area.
Oh yeah.
So
okay.
So there's a lot of range construction.
I think I might have heard some rumors about that range. It sounds like a pretty extensive facility, or like a nice range.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of work in Maine trying to convert the old gravel pit, unsafe area to shoot and making it a safer place to be, and having range safety officers present so that it's a safe place for everybody to come.
Okay. And so that excise tax you were talking about, so that's not that the consumer's not paying that at the register. That's paid by whom?
It's paid by the manufacturer.
Okay.
At the manufacturer level.
Okay.
But obviously
it's passed up.
Yeah, the person who's buying it though, they have to make more.
Yeah.
So,
but for the listener, it's not like they see the price tag on a piece of hunting equipment and then they're going to pay that on top of their state tax.
No.
What is that percentage?
It can vary a little bit, and I'd have to look it up again. I think it's around 11%.
That's what I always hear, 11%, but I hear something about variation, and I've never had it actually enumerated for me.
Yeah, and it gets a little. So it's 11%. And I think there's set fees for shafts and other things for archery equipment. So it's with the IRS, and it's quite complicated.
Yeah, sure.
All the tax laws and stuff, excise laws.
But that money then goes where? What happens next? So all that money's accumulated, and it goes to the federal government.
Yep.
And then what do you guys do with it?
So from there, it'll go into that trust fund, and then there's an apportionment. It's a calculation. Basically based on land mass of a state and also the population of that state. So it's another complicated equation, but basically it comes out to every state gets an apportionment. And this includes the District of Columbia, not for wildlife restoration, but for sport fish they will, because District of Columbia does not hunt.
Yeah.
So the islands as well can also get money, like Guam, America, Samoa.
Like American territories. Yeah. No kidding, really? Do they have hunting out there?
Yeah,
they do.
Yeah.
Gears are just turning.
I'm like, Google. I need to find out about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, do they petition for money, or is it?
So it's a set equation.
Okay.
So basically the calculations are made every year based off of how much money is in this trust fund. And then that money is apportioned out to the states. On the wildlife restoration side, it's a wildlife restoration pot. It's a basic hunter education pot, and then it's a enhanced hunter education pot. So it's kind of 3 pots of money.
What's enhanced hunter education?
So, and I think it was in 2000, they passed with $8 million just spread amongst the states to do more enhanced hunter education, or it can also be enhanced shooting sports. So the NAS program, a lot of people have heard about National Archery in the Schools program. Scholastic Clays is another one.
Oh, okay.
So these are shooting programs, shooting sports programs.
Right.
And those funds can now be used for these shooting sports programs with that enhanced funding.
Oh, okay.
Because it's not really associated with hunting directly. but this is allowed through this new source of funding.
And then the restoration work, what kind of things would that money go to? What are some examples?
So all of the funding, the decisions on what it's used for is by the state.
Okay.
We actually don't dictate to the state what they use the funding for. It's up to the state's needs. But in a lot of the, just to give you some examples, there's lots of bear research being done in states that hunt bear and states that don't hunt bear. There's a lot of it has to be mammals or birds. That's the only thing.
Oh, neat. Okay.
So it can be either one. It could be songbirds.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be a game animal.
It does not have to be a game animal,
See, that's another important piece I want people to understand, because I've often told people, well, even if you don't hunt, if you really want to, if you really care about habitat, put your money where your mouth is, buy a hunting license, right? Because that money's going to go into it. And it's important that people know that it's not just game animals. It's not just like selfishly we're just trying to grow bigger deer or something like that, right? That it's habitat and animals in general that are benefiting from this stuff. Yeah,
and with habitat work, I mean, all the species benefit, not just game animals. And further on about this act, it's a 75-25% match. So basically, license fees will be used as that 25% match towards the 75% of federal funds.
Oh, no kidding.
So the state does have to match this program to get these funds, and license dollars is generally
will they match it in any other way, or will they exclusively use the hunting license sales to fund that?
It can be any source of funding. Actually, in the hunter education program, the volunteer support that all these states are getting, we count it as in-kind match. So we value their time as their match.
No way.
So
okay, because like we have a friend, Mark, for instance, who teaches archery hunter safety. So his time spent there would be valued and count as money towards that 75%, 25% split.
Yes.
Oh, that's really cool.
That's fascinating. Okay, so people who do the volunteer work are helping the state to actually receive federal funds.
Yes.
Wow.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, it's just I know that traditionally state and federal governments haven't been always the best marketers as far as because you're saying things today in just these few minutes that I'm like, oh, that's how that works. Oh, that's how that works. And it's just unfortunate sometimes that people don't know this stuff because it's so benevolent. You hear it and you're like, oh, well, that's nice that they do it that way. Okay, so the money then goes to the states, and they'll do these different projects with it. And you said that they have to match it 25%. So does the amount of licensed sales that a state have, does that kind of typically put a cap on how much they'll receive federally? Because, let's say a state that has very low participation, and therefore they have a very small pot of money from license sales, will they try to build that up with other monies, or will that sort of create a cap on how much federal dollars they'll get, if that makes sense?
Yeah, there's no cap on it, and almost all the states are able to find ways, with this in-kind match from volunteer time.
Yeah, they can pull it together.
Yeah, and if a nonprofit organization provides resources, that can count towards it. There's a lot of creative ways for that match.
For that money to come in.
Yeah, and actually, I'll go ahead and bring this up now. There's a new act that just passed.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's
breaking news.
Hot off the press.
Breaking news. You heard it here first.
Yeah, so it is the Target Practice and Marksmanship Training Support Act.
Oh, I like it.
So what this does is we're still trying to figure out exactly what it's going to do, but basically what it's doing is it's changing for the construction and expansion and purchase of land for shooting ranges. It's changing the match to 90% federal, 10%.
Wow. So it's going to encourage new and safe facilities to go up.
It is, yep.
Oh, that's fantastic. I do live in a part of the country where, it's a lot of sandpit shooting, and it's kind of sketchy, and it's I don't like it so much.
I think that's the first place I shot was a sandpit.
It's pretty common in Maine to see that. I mean, we do have some ranges, but some of them are very highbrow and difficult to get into, members only kind of thing. A lot of fishing game clubs that are pretty run down and beat up and everything. So that's really exciting to hear that.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's in effect now, or it's going into effect. It's sort of.
Yeah, it's just got passed, so we're in the process of trying to write the regulations and maybe make some temporary guidance in the process. And I think it's we're looking to make funds available this next fiscal year, which will be October 1.
Yeah. Okay.
So 2019. So.
Let's back up a little bit because I got real excited to talk about this. And let's talk about you for a second and tell us about your background. And you've got a biology background?
I do. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting, like most college students, I wanted to be a veterinarian since I was the age of 5.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I went to Virginia Tech and loved the school, and I was planning to be a veterinarian.
You from down there?
I'm from down in Virginia.
Okay.
That's where I grew up in the Shenandoah Valley in farm country.
Mm-hmm.
Grew up in a small little homestead kind of farm.
How many deer tags they give you when you get a hunting license down there?
A lot.
72, 73.
It's quite a few down there. But I didn't hunt when I was down there.
Okay.
I was very much, I loved animals and I loved the outdoors. And I really did, at the time, wasn't really interested in hunting.
Yeah.
And then, as my path through college progressed, I realized I like the outdoors, I like animals, I should look at wildlife biology. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up going to grad school at James Madison in Virginia and working on amphibians. And, I've worked on several other species as well.
What amphibian species were you working on?
So I was working on wood frogs and spotted newts.
Oh, cool.
So eastern spotted newts. And I was, working on some how temperature affects them. I have a whole thesis if you really want to read it, but it's back on a floppy drive somewhere.
We were just talking
that's
about
really
those
funny.
on the
On the
way
drive here, we were talking about floppy drives. Okay, so you were doing that work right out of school?
I did that during school for grad school.
Yeah.
And then right after school, it was difficult getting a job, but I actually landed a internship releasing red wolves in North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
It was an awesome job.
Wow. That's a contentious thing too, isn't it?
It is, especially now. It was then too.
Yeah.
I've been, hearing a lot about in the news about them. But at the time, I was an intern and my job was to do the best I could in tracking these animals, seeing their pups, making sure they're healthy.
Can you explain for folks a little bit about, is it Canis rufus?
Mm-hmm.
It is?
I believe so. I'm trying to remember.
Tell anything that you can say, any talking points about that time, what you guys were doing, how this has all come about, because I go down to North Carolina from time to time to hunt, and a very different mindset down there for sure around conservation stuff than I'm used to. And I get excited about the idea of wolves, to be honest, but I thought it was funny to me how contentious it was. Almost like a conspiracy, like as if the government was trying to release red wolves to somehow interfere with people's lives in some way. Anyway, so what was going on with that, or do you know?
Are you asking about the controversy in particular?
I'm asking
or
about
just
what you guys were doing, why it was controversial. These red wolves were endemic to that part of the country?
So they're actually endemic to the eastern part of the United States.
How far north?
I believe they're all the way up to Maine. But
no kidding.
I'm not. It's been a long time since I've done that.
Since you've looked at it,
back at the turn of the century.
Right. trying to kick the rust off here if I can.
Yeah. But yeah, they're an amazing species. They are very people shy, is what I've found. They don't do well in urban type of environments like a white-tailed deer does, or coyotes.
Coyotes, yeah.
Yeah, and coyotes have moved more east. The Mississippi River used to be a giant barrier.
Right. And they were like from the southwest, essentially.
Yeah.
Now, gray wolves kind of kept them from expanding, right? Is the loss of gray wolves allowed coyote expansion? Is something I hear a lot.
The loss of red wolves has allowed a lot of the expansion for coyotes.
Okay, got it.
So basically red wolves were on the East Coast, but it's a very difficult species to maintain. We had a population in the Smoky Mountains, and the population does hybridize with coyotes.
That would be the coy wolf people talk about, right? People talk about these.
The coy wolves are domestic dogs and coyotes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's typically what we would consider a coy wolf.
Oh, no kidding.
But yeah, these we just call them hybrids.
Okay.
Of the red wolf. So they do hybridize, and the difficulty is you have to have an area that there are no coyotes to allow the red wolf population to increase greatly enough to be a self-sustaining population again. And that's why Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge was chosen. It's a peninsula.
Okay.
So you have kind of a choke point at the top, and those red wolves were allowed to expand throughout that peninsula.
Oh, that's interesting.
And there were active trapping to keep coyotes out.
Okay. Did it work?
It worked great. There was a population there.
Yeah.
I think it was over 100. I think it's less than that now.
Yeah.
But they were considered an experimental population. So that's why the rules are the way they are, and a lot of the controversy.
And part of it is that you have to be careful now killing coyotes out there to make sure that you haven't shot a red wolf. Is that correct? Or I saw a lot of emphasis on discriminating between the two species to try to prevent people from shooting red wolves inadvertently.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think the red wolf is a very special species. It is difficult to tell the difference between the two.
They do look a lot alike. They must be bigger.
Yeah, they are bigger. They got their jawline is definitely much different when you look at them. Coyotes, typically it's difficult for them to take a deer, but a red wolf could.
Okay. Are they like gray wolves in that they're very pack oriented?
They're not as pack oriented.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a little more isolated family units.
Really?
Yeah, it's really cool. It's pretty
fascinating.
much mom and pups and dads just
really?
hanging around. Yeah, it's pretty small units.
Oh.
You don't hear much about red wolves.
No.
There's not too many of them left, right?
There aren't. It's actually the only wild population is there where they've been re-released. They were actually removed from the wild and they were brought back.
Okay. And they must have ESA protection?
They do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Endangered Species Act protection right now.
Okay. Yep. So I got you off track on there, but you got to work with the red wolves there for a while.
I did. Yep.
Okay. Where'd you go from there?
So after working with red wolves, I got an opportunity to work with a black-footed ferret. So another endangered species.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, it's probably controversial on that one. I think every endangered species has a little controversy to it. But, I always, I don't try to avoid the controversy, but I just look at the good stuff that we do.
Yeah, of course.
And with the black-footed ferrets.
I'm on your side, by the way, of this. I just find it interesting. As like a kind of a newcomer to a lot of this stuff, I didn't expect certain things to be so contentious, and so it can be kind of a surprise when you're like, oh, there's a whole argument here. Well, I don't really know much about black-footed ferrets. What's the sort of, could you kind of give us a brief overview?
Yeah, so the black-footed ferret was, again, one of the most endangered species when it was listed, when the Endangered Species Act was passed. I think there were only 8 left in existence. They actually disappeared.
Wow.
Disappeared, and they found another one in Meeteetse, in Wyoming. They found a population of 8, and they brought them out.
So you get a population down to 8 individuals.
Yeah.
You have a genetic choke point that must be hard to recover from.
It is. So there was a lot of, luckily, genetics has come a long way, and we're able to isolate and look at genes and try to make the most genetically diverse, species we can. And we were sitting there breeding 100 of them when I was there, and then producing kits from them. I was working at a breeding facility.
Wow.
To release them into the wild. And again, like I said, I wasn't really into hunting at this time still. And, but here I am working with another predator.
Yeah. And
one of the things we found that was really interesting is you take an animal that's lived its whole life in captivity and then you throw it out in the wild, and it's really tough. We're looking at a 1 percentile chance of survival through the year. So we actually start implementing kind of a soft release. And a little bit about the black-footed ferrets, their primary source of food is the prairie dog.
Oh, wow.
And so what's actually caused a lot of the problems.
So where were you doing while you did this?
I was in Wyoming.
You went to Wyoming for this work.
Yeah, I was in Wyoming there on the Front Range of the Rockies. In Colorado, we had some facilities as well.
And they subsist almost exclusively on the prairie dogs?
Wow. Yeah. So that's one of the things that hurt the species in a way, is being so exclusive to that a lot of people shoot prairie dogs.
Yeah.
Or poison them, or what, the prairie dogs in the landscape.
They're sort of the equivalent there of maybe like a woodchuck here. Is it that they create holes in the landscape that people damage equipment in?
They create holes and they eat grass.
Yeah. So the farmers are always going to be at war with them basically over these things.
Yeah, there's every farmer has their own opinion on how they value prairie dogs, but basically the prairie dogs were removed from the landscape, removing their food source, left the ferret population without a food source. Okay. So we thought they were extinct, and then we found them, and with helps with the zoos across America and this breeding facility, we've actually bred them, as genetically diverse as we can, and there are actually several populations across the Front Range.
Wow.
Where prairie dogs are back and the ferrets are able to survive. And with this soft release, last I heard it was like 7 percentile now. So you went from 1% of survival to just 7%.
Wow.
It's still tough.
Yeah.
But that's a huge gain.
That must have been a neat project to work on. Both these projects you were just talking about, kind of getting to work with a species who's you're like kind of the last hope for them, right? It's like, That's fascinating. So what happened?
From there,
yeah.
So from there, so I was on soft money temporary positions then. And
it's for people who are listening. You get out of school with a degree in wildlife biology. It's not like there's just 1,000 jobs waiting for you, right? It's a pretty competitive field.
Yeah, it is. It's very competitive. I mean, back when I was looking at people applying to jobs, 250 people apply to one position. It's a very, very competitive field. So anyways, when I was on that soft money, the money, I just couldn't find an opportunity for me to continue on. So I actually became a high school teacher.
Oh, no kidding.
Yep. I moved back to the state of Virginia and I decided to become a high school teacher. And it was a great experience.
What were you teaching?
I was teaching at Luray High School in Virginia. It's a smaller school, great kids. They're right next to the Shenandoah National Park, which made a great opportunity for me teaching ecology.
Oh, cool.
So I got to actually teach them lessons of things that I've already done in life. We had a wildfire that broke out on the park. And so we basically scrapped everything we were doing. We're like, we're going to learn about wildfire and its place on the landscape.
Oh, neat.
So we went out and we looked at the fire and we started talking about, what comes back after the fire, and the fire isn't completely destructive. It actually helps grow things.
It's somewhat regenerative, right?
It is. And especially in the western states that are really fire prone, there's some great benefits to wildfires.
Yeah.
It was a great time. I enjoyed all of those kids working with them.
How long did you do that?
I was at that school for officially a year.
Okay.
I did some sub-teaching before I got that position.
A short stint, though.
Yeah, very short stint, but it was kind of me trying to feel things out. And, I do really love the state of Virginia. It was a way for me to get back home. But then I found an opportunity with the USGS.
Oh, cool. Okay. U.S. Geological Service.
U.S. Geological Survey.
Survey.
Yeah. I was getting tripped up for a second. It's been a while since I worked for them too, but they had an opportunity where they were getting some funding and they were working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to look at wild birds that had the potential of getting bird flu. This was during that scare.
Okay.
They were worried that a lot of the waterfowl, especially coming from the China area and that part of Asia, were flying up and over through Alaska and then down the coastline of California. And there's the potential.
I didn't really realize that. That's the flyway?
Yeah.
It goes across the Bering Strait?
Basically, yep.
And down? No way.
But they just fly right up and over.
Wow.
So it's
incredible.
It's pretty impressive.
Okay, so they were worried that birds would pick something up from domestic animals and then transport it down? Is that?
Yeah. I mean, it was even, I got to remember, I'm sure it was probably in wild animals as well.
Okay,
but
gotcha.
Domestic
right.
is normally where
sense.
you would see the issues.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were worried it would get transported to the United States, and that's not the best for the wildlife population, but also for the poultry industry that can really
ruffle feathers.
Yeah. So again, our agency, the USGS, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we're all public agencies, so we're always trying to help the public.
Do you guys fall under Department of Interior?
We do.
Okay,
yep.
And does USGS as well?
USGS does as well.
Okay.
So does the Park Service, BLM.
Okay. Yep. So that's kind of everybody's.
There's a the one that's a little outside is Department of Agriculture has U.S. Forest Service.
Yep. Okay.
So that's a little bit outside of our department.
Okay, gotcha.
But yeah, we were basically just trying to look at these wild birds, and that again engaged me more into hunting.
Yeah. Yeah, especially the waterfowl. I would imagine wild waterfowl biology work and the hunting world interface must be very closely knit.
Yeah, it is. It's very closely knit. And with this surveillance, so we need to collect samples of birds. And, we can go out with rocket nets and other technologies that we have to actually capture birds. It's labor intensive. But then there's this good pool of harvested animals that come through various areas that they don't put up a fight.
Right.
Not that I mind, but yeah, I got to work a lot with hunters, and especially in Alaska, the subsistence hunters, the native populations up there, were collecting a fair amount for subsistence. And so we were sending staff out into these towns, these villages, and collecting samples and sending them back to my lab in Madison, Wisconsin.
This question's probably not something that's super fresh in your mind, but for those hunters, how exempted were they from? Because now we're talking, waterfowl is unique in that it's federally regulated as well as state regulated, right? So if I understand it, like my state regulations have to be as strong as the federal regulations. They can be stronger, but you can't have anything less strong, right? So whereas the federal government's not really regulating, Maine's deer or Maine's moose or anything like that. So I'm curious for subsistence hunters, do you remember if they were just fully exempt from that, or does the federal government give them a different set of regulations?
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service there in Alaska actually works very closely with the native population, and they have different rules, and I guess it's a negotiation. I'm not involved with that, but,
sure.
But there are rules. The people up there that I've met are very self-conscious of.
I bet.
Of the area. One of the natives I met there, he was telling me the story. They hunt seals. Whether or not you agree with that, that's what they do.
I'm headed to Newfoundland next week, and I'm going to eat seal for the first time. So
yeah,
so I'm good. So I don't know how the people listening are, but I'm good with it.
Yeah. So the native populations, it's a very good source of calories for them.
A pretty crucial source of fat. I mean, they really rely on those oils, right?
Yeah, but he was telling me this story that they were out hunting seal, and on the ice they saw a person, and they went to go try to help this person that was out on the ice, and when they got there, it turned into a seal and disappeared. And that was a symbol for them to not hunt that population this year. So they actually stopped hunting on their own terms.
Yeah.
Because they were worried about the population for the seals.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. I mean, we talk about, you mentioned earlier the North American model of conservation, which is such a powerful and important tool. But then you look at populations like that who've stewarded the landscape for much longer periods of time, very effectively, with their own sets of rules and taboos and prescriptions and whatnot. So that's really a fascinating story.
Yeah.
Cool. So there you are working with the waterfowl. Did I take us off a tangent there? No, we're good, right?
So yeah, I think we're around.
I'll circle us back around.
Yeah.
So you're working with waterfowl. What were you working with? Ducks, primarily geese?
Well, we work mostly with waterfowl because that was thought to be one of the best transmitters, all in the water. So they're finding lots of avian influenza, the high path in the waters, and thought that would be a way to bring them over. Okay. We did test other birds just in case, like there were some shorebirds and other things that were tested. Obviously, they were just collected with nets and things like that. Yeah. So we did a huge array of different migratory birds. We really didn't test anything that wasn't migratory, like turkey or grouse, because
they're not going to move around.
They're not coming. Yeah, they're not coming across the water.
No turkeys flying across the Bering Strait. So you were saying too that was sort of a deeper introduction to the hunting world than you had had?
Yeah, it was. And I worked with the bird flu primarily, but I also got tied in with West Nile virus research. So I actually started being sent out by myself in a truck to go work with sage grouse hunters out in like Oregon and Nevada, and they would harvest birds, and I would collect blood samples to see if there was any evidence of West Nile virus.
Okay, so they still take their birds home.
Yeah.
You just grab your samples.
Yep. We just literally just some blood after it's cleaned out. So.
Is that a bird you think is going to make the ESA?
I have no clue.
No idea.
No comment. I'm really not even involved in that conversation.
There's a lot of talk about.
I do know that a lot of people care about that bird, and the hunters really care about it, and they put a lot of money into conservation. Yeah. They're doing a lot of good work. One of the things that you'll see in our agency right now is species at risk. So we have endangered species, and then we have these species at risk, and these are species that aren't quite on the list, but we're concerned about their populations. And we're actually finding that people care to keep them off the list.
Yeah.
And we're actually finding...
It's a big incentive, right?
It is.
Because, once they're on that list, everybody has to adjust, right? It's not like it's just hunters or something. Economically, everybody in the area typically, right, who's using that land for anything somehow impacted.
They fall under the Endangered Species Act. And and I feel that a lot of people, when given the choice to do the right thing...
Yeah.
And this is, again, we're a public agency, but we're finding, with the state agencies and all the other groups, organizations out there, that we have to work together in partnership. And, if we can identify problems before they happen, I think we can actually take care of them before they warrant listing.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen this bird, Grant, the sage grouse?
No. Maybe, but not that I can
This is
recall.
a very, very cool animal to look at. Very stunning. I mean, our grouse, when they display, our rough grouse are quite cool, but I mean, this is another level. Keep that in mind for the car ride home. We're going to be
Google it, everybody listening.
and hear them too. It's fascinating.
They're beautiful animals.
All right, so you did that work.
Yeah. I got to
Some
do
neat projects you got to be part of.
I did. Yeah, it was some amazing.
How is the sage grouse tied in with West Nile?
So the sage grouse are very susceptible to West Nile virus, and we've seen some areas where West Nile virus has come in and actually destroyed the populations of sage grouse.
Wow,
so
no
we're trying to. There's various different things we're doing, but one of the things I was helping with some researchers too back in the lab was working on some vaccines. There's a lot of different wildlife diseases that have been brought into this country from other countries. Like West Nile virus with black-footed ferrets, it was the bubonic plague has come over and actually affects prairie dogs and the black-footed ferrets.
Yeah.
So we're working on vaccines, working on ways to help them.
Forgive my ignorance on this, but there will be times where vaccines will be applied to wild populations, like zoonotic disease, to prevent zoonotic disease.
Yeah, there are times where we can go in. The red wolves, when I found a couple of them had gotten mange. We actually went in and we had a couple options. One, we could capture them and try to treat them like with a veterinarian. The other option was to get a veterinarian to prescribe a certain dosage, and we would figure out ways to get that to them, typically with food drops.
Wow.
I would get little balls of basically like hamburger type meat and put the antibiotic in it and then drop it off for the animals to eat. And it would help cure them.
Yeah.
Without having to bring them out of the wild.
Yeah. Especially such delicate population like that.
Yeah, and if you Google like some of the food drops for like prairie dogs and stuff, they're talking about. I read an article about like using drones and stuff to drop food now.
Yeah.
To try to help populations, because it's one of those things. It's a disease, and when it gets into a population, it can really devastate them real quick.
Yeah.
And it only happens every now and then.
Yeah.
So if you can get on top of it,
just slow it down enough for individuals to start to cope with it. I mean, you can't actually like inoculate an entire population realistically, right?
It depends. I mean, some of these populations are pretty small.
Okay.
Some of these prairie dog towns are
yeah.
small, and they could you hit that epicenter, hit that main focus area. Nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of take what you get, but
yeah. Cool.
Yeah, there are methods we're working on to help them.
Yeah. So then what happens in the saga?
So I'll actually let me take it one step back if
please.
I can. To talk about hunting in my life. And I just like to bring this up because I'm not, I know people don't like to use a traditional hunter. I did not care about hunting growing up. Really wasn't interested, didn't see any point. And
did you grow up with a dad or uncles and hunted?
My dad did hunt, but we were so busy that we didn't go hunting together. But my brother, he did through his friends. And when I moved back to Virginia to become that high school teacher, I was teaching kids about population management, and they were like, "We're going hunting for deer." I was like, "Well, that's population management. Like, let me go try this out."
Oh, interesting.
And it really was literally that little moment that happened. And in Virginia back in the 80s, we took hunter education in the schools. So everybody in the public school system had hunter education.
Wow, that would have been convenient.
They still do that?
Certain states, I think West Virginia is making another push for it.
Wow.
And there are probably certain communities within certain states that are still doing it.
I don't see why not. It's not like that hurts. It's a short program. It's like, why not do that?
Yeah. Yeah. And
that's one of the barriers to entry for people is, let's say that I know somebody who wants to get into hunting and it's nearly the season. And I say, well, I'll take you, get a hunting license. Oh, I haven't been through hunter safety. And then it's not till the next year that they can actually get out there. So that can be a barrier if you haven't. I did hunter safety, I think about 5 years before I really started getting serious about hunting. And that way, once I got serious, it was like I could start. I didn't have to do that then start. So, so you'd already done that then. Yeah,
I had, and we can talk about the barriers. They're trying to. A lot of states are trying to knock down that barrier of hunter education now.
Take it away completely.
So basically, the way they're looking at it is they're looking at these mentorship opportunities. So exactly what you described. I was just looking at the Vermont website. They offer a mentorship license now. Yeah. And so you can actually get a mentorship license and go hunting with someone else who is a fully accredited person with a license who's taken hunter safety.
And they probably have to be 18 and have 3 years consecutive license or something like that, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on what the rules are, what a mentor is qualified as for,
like that
for the state of Vermont.
And stuff like that, though. Yeah.
But basically, this person doesn't have to have hunter education.
Yeah.
And they can go out with somebody who has had that class and has that training and work with them and kind of do that trial experience, right? It's really hard to invest all this time in class and try to, get used to using, a firearm or purchasing a firearm to go hunting, whereas you have somebody that can kind of mentor you through that.
Which is the traditional way people learned through time. So
it was, and I think that's one of the declines right now in hunting is that traditional method isn't as prevalent as it used to be. Yeah. People are busy. There's lots of things competing for time now. And it takes some time to get in touch with nature and really understand it.
It's also really hard if you don't have a mentor. You're going to, say you go to hunter safety, you get your hunter's license, and then you got a book or something, or you read the magazines, heaven forbid, because they're so confusing or all telling you different things. I mean, if you don't have someone to take you out, it's a pretty slow start. And I've watched some hunters try to do it on their own, some new hunters, and I've watched and experienced being a new hunter, learning from people, and wow, it's a different learning curve altogether if you have somebody who can guide you through to success, because then you're like, oh, now I know how to do it, versus you're trying a bunch of different things. Yeah, none of it's working.
and it's there's a lot of things that are progressing. One of the things that just come to mind is IHEA, the International Hunter Ed Association. It's basically all the states are participating, and there's actually international with Canada, Mexico, Australia. I think South Africa is also participants in this organization. And they're looking at coming out with some of these videos, these how-to videos, like YouTube videos, right?
Yeah, good.
I've talked to some new hunters, and they're like, oh, I just want to watch it on YouTube and learn.
That's how they're used to learning.
Yeah. Having a mentorship kind of through YouTube and say, okay, this person will take you from the beginning to the end of this is what I did, and this is how I do it. So they're looking at making some videos. I think there's some out there now, but, there's a lot of misinformation too out there. Yeah. And it gets some confusion with some of the new hunters.
It's confusing, and there's lots of little camps. You have the people who are obsessed with, I just am after big antlers, or you have the people who are really into management, or you have the people who are really into this side, that side, the other side, and so you don't necessarily understand all that in the beginning. So one of the things that's really nice about talking to you, Richard, is like I'm hearing about so many things that are happening. I hear so much, on the other side of restrictions and, like around the idea of there being more ranges, for instance. It's like, that's surprising to me, because it seems like the cultural trend is away from it. Or what you just said about easing regulations so more hunters can come in. It's like, oh, really? That's great, because I'm hearing just so much of the other stuff all the time. So that's really nice that there's some really positive things taking place like that. It's cool.
Yeah. I think the states are doing a great job.
It sounds like it.
They're really, really looking at it. Within our group here, NIAFWA, the Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. Okay. They have an R3 committee now. Okay. So they have this committee that's dedicating their time to trying to figure out ways to get people into hunting and fishing. So they're really putting a lot of effort into it now, and I'm seeing, since I've only been here for 3 years. Okay. And I'm seeing a lot of change since I got here. Wow. It's happening faster than I thought it would, and it's all good.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the WildFed podcast. I'm really excited to announce that our WildFed hats are now available. Your hat's more than just a fashion accessory. It's one of your most important pieces of hunting, fishing, and foraging equipment. Your hat shields your eyes from the sun on the landscape and glare out on the water, improving your visibility and your ability to see what you're searching for. I wasn't really a hat person before I became serious about marksmanship, hunting, and fishing. In fact, I pretty much avoided ball caps altogether. Now I almost never go into the field without one. It's just simply too important of a piece of equipment. Visually scanning the landscape or shooting under high sun without a hat brim is very frustrating. Fishing without a hat is nearly an exercise in futility. But finding a hat you love can be just as frustrating. WildFed's low-profile, trucker-style snapback hats are clean, simple, and classy. The woven label reads, WildFed. Food is all around you. We produced one in the color they call Loden, which is like a muted gray-green, and I chose it because it blends in when I'm out in the field, but it's right at home in urban environments too. And we're also offering a limited release in Hunter Orange. These hats have been very popular, and I think that's because most states and provinces require you to wear at least an orange hat during the firearms season on big game, making it a perfect companion to your hunts or just to keep you and your family safe out on the landscape during the hunting season. Again, these are extremely high quality, structured, trucker style snapback hats, and you can find them at wild-fed.com. Go over there and have a look. Now, enjoy the second half of the show.
So what age were you when you went on that hunt you were just telling us about?
Yeah, I was 27.
Okay. Yeah. See, I like those stories because I was in my mid-30s, and it's just like it's a different learning curve. You said non-traditional, which is sort of like one way to say it. It's like, but there's so many people now who are taking this non-traditional path because there was like a break in the generations for a lot of people, right? And this wasn't passed on, and it's a lot to pick up later in life. So I always like hearing these kind of stories.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. In my spare time, I teach hunter education in the state of Massachusetts.
Oh, cool.
We're seeing a lot of people, post-college coming in to take the basic hunter education class.
Yeah. What are the kind of, like demographically, like what's bringing people in? Is it food interest? Is it self-sufficiency? Is it, how do they get there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different interests out there. Yeah. I mean, I keep hearing the food one driven a lot more. Mm-hmm. And I do think that's important. I know like Vermont actually is now hosting these field to fork seminars a couple times a year where they're, people are really food driven. So they're kind of teaching you, after the harvest, then how to process the animal, and serve it. Yeah. So we're seeing a lot of this kind of movement per se, for the food motivations.
We were just with the regional coordinator for the National Wild Turkey Federation. He brought us, he handles New England. He brought us New Hampshire has produced a cookbook, a wild, meat and fish. It's a game and fish cookbook. Yeah. And it's really well done. I was really surprised. I mean, again, like I said in the past, when I think about like the materials for that state and federal government sometimes put out, I wasn't expecting it to be
really nice.
Yeah, it was vibrant. Yeah. It was really well done, and so it's just cool to see this change that's taking place that you're sort of hinting at. So how did that hunt go for you?
So my first hunt. So here I am, this graduate high school teacher. And I'm with a bunch of friends, my brother and his friends, and most of them are in the trade businesses. So, my brother's a truck driver, plumbers, auto mechanics, right? That kind of crowd. That, amazing people. I love hanging out with them. But at the same time, they kind of look at me like, "You're the college boy, right? You're the educated or educated person." Right. We joke a lot.
Of course,
great people. But they were kind of like, "Oh, we're going to take the college boy out hunting. Yeah, this is going to be fun. He's going to get out there with the bugs and all this stuff. He's inside of his lab all the time."
But you've done a bunch of field work.
Yeah, I had done field work.
Right.
But but that's what they
Standing
think.
up for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey guys, lay off.
Yeah. But that's what they think. I went to college.
Right.
And then I went to grad school. But yeah, I've already done field work. I've already, helped track wolves and work on black-footed ferrets, and I've been out there. So I went out, and they all kind of lined up in the one area, and I kind of walked off on my own. I was like, I'm going to just find where I think would be an appropriate spot to sit. And saying this, my shooting skills were really well. I think it's, the ethics for going hunting. You need to have your shooting skills up. Yeah. And I've been shooting with my babysitter when I was in I think like second grade or something like that. Right. I started shooting. I mean,
quite really comfortable around.
Really young.
'Cause that's another big barrier to entry for people.
It is. So I was very comfortable using a firearm, going up there and pretty accurate with it. And of course, they give me the biggest gun they have, just because it's a joke, to them. Yeah. But anyways, I go up and I find my spot. I sit down for 2 hours. This giant buck walks out in front of me. I shoot it. It falls right in front of me. Done. I was like, this is hunting, right? I mean, to me, easy. And nobody else got anything except for one guy got one at the end of the day, and the rest of them like, we've been hunting for years and haven't gotten a nice buck. Like, what did you do? I'm like, well, I went where you wouldn't go, like in the brushy areas, right? And it's like my college education is in wildlife.
Yeah, right.
So
how beneficial has that been for you in hunting, having that background in and biology and the field work. And so understanding how animals use habitat and all that has to be advantageous.
Oh, yeah. I think it's definitely helped me a lot. I've come across a lot of people that I've been pretty lucky. Let's put it that way.
Lucky as,
as far as being able to actually see a deer and harvest it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So I consider that lucky. I mean, I really enjoy, the food. That's why I do it. I'm not, even though I said I shot a big buck, I actually didn't care.
Yeah.
I'm
that's just what came out.
That's just what came out, right? Sure. And it's meat.
Yeah.
So, I'm glad to shoot a doe, to be honest.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that helps the population management aspect a lot better sometimes shooting the does.
Yeah.
But depending on the areas, actually in Western Mass where I live now, we have a smaller deer population, which is surprising.
Yeah.
Eastern part of the state is just exploding out of control.
Is it because of the edge habitat created by all the people living out there?
I think there's a little more food sources and things like that. Where I live, it's very rocky and there's not a lot of good food sources for deer.
Because like in Maine, I mean, the southern part of the state where all the people are, that's where all the deer are. And it's really right along the coast where we have our expanded archery, where it's unlimited doe tags if you want to participate there. But as you get into the more rural parts of the state, there's less and less whitetails around.
Yeah, that's the way it is in Massachusetts as well.
Yeah, so it's like around the coast, they're like kill all the does you can, and then as you start getting up north, they really restrict that back to bucks only.
Yeah, it is. And I put in for a doe tag every year, and I think it's like a 25% right now to get one. So fingers crossed. I'm in the lottery again.
I didn't get mine last year, but I got it the year before. That was awesome. Anyway, so you've had good success, and the part of that is just that you understand the animals a little bit more.
I definitely think that gave me a pretty good advantage going out there and just kind of thinking about it and realizing how smart deer really are.
Yeah, survivors.
Yeah, they are. I've read these articles where they can even crawl, to get around you. And
I've been hearing more about that, actually. People talking about seeing that. I haven't seen it, but people talking about them crawling almost like a cat would crawl, right?
Yeah, they're pretty sneaky little animals. Actually, I was trying to figure out, I'll just talk real quick about West Virginia when I lived there. When I hunted there, I typically would just sit in a stand, and a lot of hunters would move around, and I was seen as a safe haven for deer to hide under. And so normally, because I only had a buck tag normally at that time, because I'd already filled my doe tag, and basically I'd have does just hanging out underneath me a lot of the day. Okay. But I could see all the people in orange walking around,
moving around, pushing them.
And I'm just like, okay, that's fine. It was very fun.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, where'd you go next after that?
So after I was in Wisconsin there with the USGS, doing a lot of different disease research, I got my first permanent job. So I finally made it into the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I work for Ecological Services. Ecological Services is the program that's in charge of administering the Endangered Species Act, also doing a lot of good conservation work across the landscape.
Ecological Services. It's funny. I've never heard of them before, even though I hear about the ESA all the time. Okay.
Yeah. So I was working in Panama City, Florida.
Okay.
I got hired actually to start working on red cockaded woodpeckers and beach mice. But pretty quickly, because my dad has an electrical background, it sounds really weird, but I started working on sea turtles. And that was because sea turtle lighting is one of the big impacts on sea turtles. A lot of the hotels and things would have the white lights, and the sea turtles would not walk back into the ocean after laying eggs or when
they go toward the reflection of the moon off the water or something.
Typically, that's what attracts them is that reflection.
So they're getting confused and going right toward the hotels.
Yeah, and into the roads, and so we spent a lot of time educating people.
These are the newly hatched sea turtles,
and even sometimes the adults. I mean, most of the time it's the hatchlings.
Okay, so they come out. They emerge through the sand, and they're going the wrong way.
Yeah.
Poor little guys.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting when you've evolved or you have an adaptation, and then the conditions change like that, right? It works for so many millions of, turtles, my goodness, they're older than dinosaurs, right? Turtles go all the way back. They're some of the earliest.
So what were you doing? Wow. You were working to prevent that?
So I was working to prevent that. I worked with, the Endangered Species Act. So it's this, what we call Section 7 consultation a lot of times, where we're working with other federal agencies to try to minimize the impact to endangered species. A lot of times I end up working with the Army Corps of Engineers. A lot of times they were doing beach nourishment operations where they're trying to put sand back on the beach.
Yeah, that they pull out of the harbors and stuff?
Yeah, they could pull it either out of the harbors or they'll just pull it offshore sometimes.
Okay.
I think a lot of the cases they were literally just pulling it offshore or putting it back on the shore.
Yeah.
The natural ecosystems on a lot of these islands is the island will actually rotate back into the mainland and a new island will form in the ocean.
Wow.
But we've, built structures on these islands, to support the economy. Like I said, we work for the public.
Yeah.
So there's always this balance, right? And so you have these, people that want their beautiful beaches and have their hotels and everything on there, which I understand. And I go to these places.
Yeah, right.
But I work with them to try to minimize that impact, right? So, again, reaching that balance. So a lot of the
changing lighting and things like that.
So sometimes we would go in and help people change lighting. We would find, we had a couple grants that we were able to give to some places to get some amber lighting. It's an LED light in that amber wavelength, and they don't see that light as much, so it's not really an attractant. Plus, LED is very focused light versus some of these metal halide lights that just kind of glow. So it's a very focused light, and changing that has helped a lot. We've also, with these nourishments, they've funded groups that will go out and monitor the sea turtles. You've probably heard about people putting the little box around the nest, and it basically protects the sea turtle eggs from predators trying to get in. And also when they emerge, people are there. They kind of track them.
Yeah, and they kind of push them, corral them toward the sea.
Yeah. We've actually found that it's very important for those little sea turtle hatchlings to go through that initial struggle of walking to the sea. It actually changes some things inside of their body.
And flicks switches on for them, kind of.
Yeah, it really helps them. So they need that initial struggle. If you just picked them up and just threw them in the ocean, it's actually not as good as that initial struggle to get there.
I've seen this. This is like true of a lot of things. It's true of like if you tear the chrysalis away for a butterfly, they don't form properly.
Oh.
They need to fight their way out of there. It's like what gets their wings going. I'm sure I've worded that very poorly, and we'll hear from entomologists about it. But anyway, something like that. Okay, so that's a pretty fascinating piece. So you're down in Florida. So this work's taken you kind of a few different spots.
It has, yeah. I've got to travel the country, and and some of my research days with the USGS too, I got to fly around the country and go to Alaska and California and do different research projects. So I've gotten to see a lot of it. And when I was down in Florida, I was mostly focused on the sea turtles is what I spent a lot of time on. I also helped out with beach mice, which is another endangered species on some of these islands along the Gulf Coast. But then the oil spill happened.
Oh, wow.
Right.
In the Gulf there.
In the Gulf, yeah. So that happened while I was there.
Wow.
And so I was getting phone calls all the time about, we think we see an oil bird, or, when the first initial hit. And so
that must have been devastating to watch if you were boots on the ground for that.
Yeah. I mean, it was a little surreal because you were watching the videos online, right? And it's so far offshore that I'm not physically seeing it, right? So anyways, we kind of just went into overdrive, and I had spent 8 months actually on that cleanup operation.
Oh, wow.
Which was a great opportunity for me. And then, we definitely did some good by going around. I did get out to New Orleans for just a little bit outside of that in Louisiana to help get a few oil birds. I got out there kind of late. I spent a lot of my early time just walking the beaches and just monitoring. And we ended up making the decision to move all the sea turtle nests.
Wow.
So we actually ended up taking the sea turtle eggs out right before they hatched because we found that that's the most stable time period for them not to die in transport.
When they're really well formed in there.
Yeah. So when they're
nice
within a few days of hatching, they're good and stable to actually transport at that time. So you got to think they're buried, 2 feet or so beneath the sand in a very stable environment. They're not moving or anything.
Right.
So we
put them on a truck or something.
We did. We actually had a great agreement with FedEx at the time. Believe it or not, there was
some of these stories. I don't know how you'd picture it working, but you think something more official going on than that. FedEx, that's awesome.
Yeah, well, it was a really good. It was a couple that kind of dedicated their time and a vehicle. We actually labeled it for the turtles, and it was a great partnership. And they basically,
how far did they bring?
It would have been a great FedEx.
So we would take them over to like Cape Canaveral area, to the Atlantic beach, all the way from Pensacola, or actually beyond.
So they were in
Alabama,
the Gulf, and you took them out over to the east,
to the Atlantic side. Yep, and then let them emerge there, and then let them walk into the Atlantic there.
Wow,
it was cool. It was quite an operation. It's a lot of work to move. And I remember one particular nest. It was pretty deep. It was a big female. It was, normally you're looking at under 100 eggs or around 100 eggs. This was like 120, which and it was deep. I was getting a little deeper than I would like to admit.
Yeah, really. She dug it down like that.
Dug, yeah, I mean, you think about the size of sea turtle. They dig down as far as they can reach with that rear.
What's a big sea turtle to you?
It depends on the species.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, this sea turtle.
How big do you think she was?
How big she was? I mean, across the shell, I'd probably say, over 4 feet.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Just the shell itself. So, I mean, they're just amazing. I mean, I don't know for sure because I didn't see her. All I got was the nest. But
I've come upon them snorkeling in the Keys, and all of a sudden turned around, and there's this, like a small vehicle or something, just this gigantic animal.
Yeah. And they're very powerful animals too. It's quite amazing. I got to work on a cold stun, which basically the water gets really cold in the Gulf, and the turtles, they're cold-blooded, so they actually stop moving, and then actually they can die because they'll just start floating, and they have no control. They don't have the ability to move anymore. Yeah. So we bring them into captivity and then release them again after it gets a little warmer. So I got to go do that, and I got to handle a lot, and I got to work with an aquarium there in the Gulf. And it was amazing to see. I think that one tank was like 1,200 sea turtles.
Wow.
I mean,
really?
They're all little, very small. They're juvenile.
Still so graceful to watch them too.
Yeah, it is. But they're very powerful. I got a lot of handling of them, and if you don't orient them up, they will pull you down with them.
Wow.
Like even the little guys.
Wow.
It's very impressive how strong they are.
Wow, that's neat. Especially
the green turtles, because they have very long front flippers.
Yeah. I don't know if I told you the story, if you've heard it, Grant, but Grant and I have gone down to Florida to hunt iguanas. They got that invasive green iguana issue. And every once in a while, they'll get a cold snap down there where the iguanas fall out of trees. People think they're dead. And there was a story a couple of years ago of a guy who was going around scooping them up, putting them in his car. And they warmed up in there, you know what I mean? And he's all of a sudden, he's got all these iguanas running around inside his car.
good image right there.
Yeah, I like that story. Wow. All right, so then what happens? So that's now you're in the service at that point.
I am. I'm officially in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I've been there ever since. And like I said, I did that oil spill kind of detail for 8 months. And in that work, I ended up working at Bon Secours National Wildlife Refuge and helping the cleanup operations.
Where's that?
Bon Secours National Wildlife Refuge in Alabama.
Okay.
The Alabama has, the very end of it has a beachfront. There's actually a beach in Alabama, believe it or not. But it's a beautiful beach. And so I worked down there and basically just helped in the cleanup operations to remove, because we did have active oil that came ashore, and it was removed. And we were, concerned about the National Wildlife Refuges as far as because when you take tar balls, a lot of the equipment that takes it would take away like seashells as well.
Oh yeah.
And there's actually a lot of shorebirds that will use seashells to help in their hiding of their nest. So like plovers, for example, a lot of plovers need that shell on the beach to be able to, camouflage and just use that material. Having a blanket, sterile beach.
They stand right out then.
They would stand right out, and it's just not a good ecosystem, right? A sterile monoculture is not a good ecosystem.
Never good, yeah.
So, we worked with them to clean up the tar balls that we could, but we didn't do these deep clean operations on those federal properties because we're concerned about the wildlife.
Yeah.
And we have some really good wildlife down there.
Yeah.
So from there, got to work with the refuge system. So then I transferred over to Canaan Valley National Wildlife Refuge in West Virginia. And it's, wild and wonderful, right, out in West Virginia. There's lots of wildlife. We had 16,000 acres there, surrounded by Monongahela National Forest, which is about 1 million acres, and there's several state parks and a wildlife management area as well, just right around that area. So there's lots of deer.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I, got back into pursuing deer hunting. I actually stopped when I went to Florida because the fishing is so good there.
Yeah, it is good.
It's very hard to
inshore or offshore.
Oh, in the Gulf.
Yeah.
So the Gulf is kind of, a mild offshore.
Yeah, right.
But beautiful fishing.
It is. I mean, you could easily get wrapped right up in that.
Yeah. So I, spent my time on a boat.
No hunting those key deer.
Yeah. And during my work, when I did like red cockaded woodpecker work, you would be in the interior of Florida and the mosquitoes and the heat. I'm not the best at that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
can relate. Yeah.
Yeah. So I enjoy being out in the coastal area on the water. But yeah, so I moved to West Virginia, where we got like 200 inches of snow, very cold climate, very rainy, wetland, but beautiful place, lots of deer, and so I started hunting deer again. And also we have lots of grouse. Mm-hmm. Rough grouse are very, very prevalent in that area. There's woodcock there as well. But the grouse population.
That's a woodcock in my yard.
Yeah.
They're amazing.
They are, and it's a great woodcock population, and there are lots of hunters that come through to hunt woodcock in that area. You kind of wouldn't think about that being in West Virginia, but it's a high elevational wetland.
Yeah.
Beautiful place, and so I got my lab, and I was just like, well, I got a lab. It's a bird dog, right? Kind of. I was like, let's go hunt grouse. So we just would plunk around and see if we could find grouse, and she would find 11 of them, which is a large number, especially for people up here where we don't have a large grouse population. Yeah. But, my ethic is I normally look at hunting as a population control. Yeah. So I typically try to pick those species.
That's how you like to frame hunting in your mind. Yeah, mm-hmm. That's interesting. I don't meet a lot of people that do, actually. Or when I hear that, I'll hear that as an argument for hunting poorly framed sometimes. Like people will be like, oh, if we don't, everything's going to get out of control. It's like, well, I don't know about that. But I like the way that you're framing it. It's a different perspective than I hear.
Yeah. Yeah. I see the population. There's, more than, the population threshold kind of thing.
Sure,
so there's lots of them out there. Deer are destroying the habitat in a way. It sounds so awful, but there's just too many of them. So I'm like, let's control some deer.
Yeah, right.
So, there at Canaan, we were very open to hunting and had lots of people, applying for permits and coming out hunting. And then I went grouse hunting. It was more just for my dog than anything. Grouse isn't as large as a deer.
Yeah, right.
But there were plenty of them, and so I enjoyed it. It's the only time I've grouse hunted. And then
they eat well, huh? Rough grouse.
Oh, they do. They do.
So nice.
It was very, very nice. So I was there for just over, I think it was over 3 years, and then I got this position here. I moved to Massachusetts.
Okay.
And then since I've moved here, I've noticed that the turkey population is very large.
Very large.
So here I go again, learning all over again. I'm now starting to go turkey hunting. I haven't harvested a turkey yet because that is, I've had a mentor kind of go out with me one day and kind of show me a little bit, and I'm just kind of playing around,
figuring it out.
I get to see them a lot.
Yeah,
it's very active.
It's a lot harder to see them in the woods than it is to see 20 of them on somebody's lawn. I find that a lot of people will be like, "Oh, it looks like it'd be easy because they're everywhere." But
and I've chosen not to hunt in my lawn. That we have bird feeders out there, and I just don't agree with having that food source there that I'm putting out. But just a challenge, right? Yeah. And it's a lot of fun. But I have tons of turkey every day coming through my yard. I go deep into the woods and I try to call them to me, trying to do the more traditional
spring hunt.
Yeah, and it's been challenging, but it's been fun.
And I love turkey hunting. Tell us about your job here now. What are you doing? And just tell us about kind of, because the role has shifted a bit for you now. Yeah,
so I think this role that I'm in now is kind of a mixture of all my different experiences. Because the states are doing all those different things similar to what I did within the federal government, but the states are doing it as well. So I can bring in that experience, including Endangered Species Act. I mean, that's one of the things when a state applies for funding, we have to make sure that they're using all of the federal laws as well. So the NEPA, Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, making sure that they're following all of those regulations and laws. So
what is that you were just describing there, those laws you just mentioned? What are those in a sort of abbreviated, in a nutshell?
In a nutshell?
Yeah. What are those? You brought up 3 specific things there.
Yeah. So NEPA is I always get it wrong. It's National Environmental Policy Act, I believe. We use so many acronyms here that we get really confused.
I can tell, yeah.
But basically, we have to make sure that that's not providing an impact into even the human environment. So we make sure, and this is where the public really gets their voice too. We have to make sure that the public's on board with what is going on with federal funds.
Yeah. In other words, what the state's going to do with that money. You have to. Was there like a open comment period or something before they do it?
Well, it all depends on the activity.
Okay.
A lot of the activities, which is great about this program, a lot of these activities have been going on since 1937,
Right.
very long going, and are non-controversial from what I've seen. I haven't really had anybody speak up to say no, please don't save the bears.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're long-standing. So there's actually within the act there's a category of exclusions. So basically, if the program is going to teach hunter education, for example, one of the exclusions is to educate the public, and so you do not have to have this huge long process of getting public comment and all that, because this is seen as such a mild impact to the human. It's not really an impact to the human environment, so it's excluded. So a lot of our grants do follow under that. If we do have some sort of proposal that the public doesn't like, or there's possible conflicts, then we will have an open public comment period.
Okay. And
then people will comment on
what
that.
What might be an example of something like that there was some public pushback against?
I don't know the specific example off the top of my head, but some of the things that I've heard that have come up in the past have been like removal of a dam.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So a lot of, you
have stakeholders on both sides of that argument.
Yeah. So you have stakeholders that may, want to have that dam structure there for the use of that impoundment. And other people want that continual flow. So, trout and other migratory fish could now use that entire stream. So that could be a conflict. So there would be, some public, input into that. And then we would just make sure that everybody, got to address, their concerns, and then we make a final decision based off of all of those comments.
The grants that you're talking about, are these monies from the PittmanRobertson Act? Is this other monies?
So they're actually within our office, we have 11 different grant programs.
Okay.
One of them is wildlife restoration.
Okay.
The biggest ones are wildlife restoration and sport fish restoration funds.
The sport fish restoration, that's Dingle Johnson?
Yes. Dingle
and
Johnson.
That's sort of a similar in a function in that that's excise on fishing equipment?
Yep. So
do you know roughly what falls? Is that like hooks, line, and rods, or?
Yeah, it would be reels, rods, hooks, but it's actually expanded even beyond that. So in 1950, basically an equivalent was passed for sport fish. And since then, too, they've actually expanded it to include motorboat fuel tax.
Oh, wow.
So it's excise tax on motorboat fuels. There's small engine taxes. There's import taxes for people importing yachts and things like that. And when that part got added to the act, they added access points. So boating access grants, boating infrastructure grants, these Clean Vessel Act, which is pump out stations so people can pump out waste from their boats and not just dump it into the water. So a lot of these facilities and uses were brought in with this act.
Okay.
And so, yeah, all these people that are, paying motorboat fuel tax are actually getting a benefit because now this boat ramp gets built.
I was going to say, there's a pretty good, I got my first motorboat last year. I've always been just, canoes and things like that. And I got my first motorboat last year to kind of just get fishing in a bigger way. And I've been really impressed with the boat launches everywhere. I mean, there's so many.
Yep.
And then you open the gazetteer and, once once you're needing boat launches, you realize how much public access there is.
Yeah.
So a lot of that is built and maintained through these funds.
Yeah. Actually, when they passed the amendments to the act, it's 15% must be used on boating access.
Public access. Oh,
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So yeah, and it's and a lot of the money from that is coming from that fuel tax.
Is this right up into the coast, or is it or are we talking about inland from the height of tide? Does it matter?
So there's actually a split.
Okay.
We'll get even more complicated, but there's
Yeah.
actually a marine and freshwater split.
Okay.
That's actually later been added to this. All of these get very complicated.
Sure.
But basically, to sum it up, is there's a proportion of licenses that are for saltwater and some are for freshwater. So the money is apportioned appropriately in those states that have both environments.
Okay.
If you're in a state that doesn't have a marine environment,
Right.
it's all freshwater.
Yeah. Okay, got it.
But yeah, it's allowed to be used for all. Like New Jersey has put in artificial reefs.
Oh, yeah.
And so the states own within the state waters.
Yeah.
The federal waters don't start till I forget what the mileage is, but quite a few miles out.
200? No, all the state waters.
The state waters, I think, is 55 or something like that.
Okay.
But
I can't remember now.
I'm not. Yeah. I don't deal with the fishing grants as much. Going out there.
So one is the Dingle Johnson, one is Pittman-Robertson, and then you have all of these other grant programs as well. Where is those funds coming from?
So they come from various different areas. Actually, the Clean Vessel Act is one of those other. It's actually under sport fish, but the funding's kind of coming off the top. We look at it as a different source of funding, but we have National Coastal Wetland Conservation, Highlands Conservancy Act, like I said, Clean Vessel Act, Boating Infrastructure Act, State Wildlife Grants, Tribal Wildlife Grants, Great Lakes Restoration Initiatives, Endangered Species Acts, and National White Nose Syndrome.
The bats.
Yeah, the bats. So of this, some of this money is coming from appropriations. So from Congress appropriates so much money to this. It's actually, if you look at the total amount of money, about 10% of it is appropriated of all those grants. Okay. And the rest of it is excise taxes.
Wow.
So actually the majority of the money that we're putting out,
90% of it.
Yeah, is from excise taxes.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. On these goods we're talking about.
Yes. Yep.
It's how do you feel about, I want to hear your positive spin on this because I know you like to put a positive spin. What are your thoughts on, there's been some conversation recently saying, hey, hunters and fishermen are footing the bill for all this work. We need to start something like this for, hiking equipment and backpacking equipment, things like that. Then other people are saying, no way, because then they become stakeholders, and then a lot of those people don't support hunting and fishing, and that might erode some of our opportunity and our rights. Just curious, do you see do you think this is working as is, or we really need to dramatically increase the amount of licenses sold and equipment sold, or do you see it as, we should open it up where recreators of all kinds start footing the bill here? No opinion at all?
Well, I've heard all of the arguments.
Yeah.
And, like I said at the beginning, we're a public agency, so we generally do what the laws ask us to do.
Of course.
So, I think there's some proposals out there to get some additional funding for other species. One of the things, like I said, the wildlife restoration is birds and mammals, and then you have the sport fish, which is anything that's typically in the water. We include other things like horseshoe crabs and stuff. We can educate people about horseshoe crabs and clean water. So there's lots of things that are water, but there's kind of like that group in the middle, like amphibians. And the State Wildlife Grant Program does help those. And that's an appropriated funding from Congress every year. And the Tribal Wildlife Grant
Is Congress good about funding that?
They have been funding it for quite some time.
Yeah. Reliably.
Yeah, it has been. I mean, every year you never know, right? But
stress around the office before the budget.
And that was one of the beauties of the Sport Fish, Wildlife and Wildlife Restoration Acts, were that it's an excise tax that is basically guaranteed.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to hire staff at a state agency level, you know that you're going to be getting money next year.
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually build that state staff and, foreseeably have money coming in to pay those people.
Right.
Whereas if it's an appropriations every year, it's a little hard to do a long-term 20-year study on bears when 3 or 4 of those years you might not get any funding, and it kind of messes up your research.
However, I'm going to put this in a politically neutral way. When you have different administrations with different policies and different approaches to governance, do you have dramatic swings in how much, for instance, with gun sales? Some administrations drive gun sales like crazy, usually because they're against gun sales. And then other administrations are gun friendly and gun sales go down because people feel less stress about it. Does that dramatically or only marginally impact how much money ends up in these funds?
It could dramatically impact the funds. We've seen kind of a bump in the past of funds coming in. Again, we don't control the markets. It's whatever is available is available. So I think some of these R3 movements are kind of benefiting from that right now.
Yeah.
Now they're able to hire some of these staff, and some of them are temporary because there is a fear that if the sales go down, in a year or so, they'll start to see a decline in the funds that they have available to them.
Man, it's really complicated. You just because there's so many conversations that take place in the public sphere that this stuff is not factored into. Like I said before, when the gun regulation debates happen, this isn't something that you ever hear. I've never heard it break into the news cycle. Yeah. So it's just the impacts that it could have. If we were to make radical changes to how things are done, it seems like it could have huge impacts on flora, fauna, clean water and things like that. What's your crystal ball tell you about the future of all of this? Do you think that the North American model, this model we're talking about, do you see it spreading around the world over time? Do you think that this model is, because it appears to me from the travels that I've had, I'm like, wow, we have it really good here with wildlife.
We do have it really good here with wildlife. I've talked to people in other countries over in Europe, and it's the old traditional, the owner of the land owns the animals kind of mentality, and it makes it very difficult for the common person to participate.
Becomes a very highbrow kind of activity to hunt, right?
It does. And I've had lots of conversations with people from all sorts of different countries, and it's very difficult in other countries.
Yeah.
I think we do have it very well here in the United States.
And even after all of the market hunting and the restoration's been so good, we have incredible game populations.
We do now.
Even when we're saying, oh, this is declining here, this might be declining here, overall, we do have incredible game populations.
Yeah. And one of the things to just, keep in mind is all of the hunting is regulated. And we would not hunt a population if the population couldn't handle the pressure. And the states know this, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service knows this. That's why we set the migratory bird regulations when it comes to waterfowl. We kind of look at the populations and we figure out, how much of the population can we harvest and still have a population that maintains.
Yeah, I just got my guide's license in Maine, and so I have some topics fresh in my mind. And one is this cue card that I had to memorize, which was the duck bag limits. 15 ducks, 5 regular ducks, no more than 2 canvasbacks, 2 redheads, or 2 hen mallards, no more than 3 wood ducks. You can have 5 mergansers. Only 2 can be hooded. You can have 5 sea ducks, but only 3 can be scoters. There's, a very complicated set of rules, but because of this, right? Because each species is it's not like we go, oh, you can shoot this many ducks. It's like species by species by species, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's your point, is like that like the hunting regulations are based on biological field work, right? And population dynamics and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think, back to what we were talking about, is this a model that the rest of the world is going to eventually look to and want to emulate, do you think? I mean, not the rest of the world. That's a lot.
It's a very big world.
It is a big world. But do you think that this will continue to work and continue to spread, this kind of way of doing things?
I mean, I think the North American model has been working in this country great.
Canada uses a similar model?
I believe so. I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know a lot of people go and hunt in Canada. It seems to be very similar to ours. And they call it the North American model, so
yeah.
It's not called the US model.
Yeah. But it's working. Like, there's not, aside from this recruitment, retainment and reactivation issue of keeping the numbers up. Like, if we can keep the hunting and fishing numbers up,
do we have enough funding?
Tell me, Richard, we're going to be able to keep doing this, right? I don't want it to end.
Yeah, I mean, you can never predict, what's going to happen in the future. I think things are working very well right now.
Yeah.
And, as long as we have funding, I mean, right now we have a really good source of funding with sport fish and wildlife restoration, and it's been happening since the 30s, right? For wildlife restoration, 50s for sport fish. It's been a great source. And right now we don't see any indication that anything's going to change on that side. And if anything, there's some new potential of getting other sources of funding coming in to help with some of those species like amphibians and stuff. If that happens, then, we'll follow whatever laws.
There's some little gaps in it, you think, that could be filled in over time?
Yeah, I mean, the state agencies, I think they always want more money, right? Who doesn't?
Yeah.
I think, you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
So just, whatever the needs are. And as far as my position goes, all I can say is whatever the laws allow me to do, we're here to be a great partner. We're trying to help the states.
Yeah. You tiptoe well, sir.
Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah.
Hey, what happens with the duck stamp money? So, and for people listening, not only do you need to have a state hunting license to hunt ducks, but you have to buy a federal migratory. It's not water. Is it waterfowl or migratory bird? I think it's a federal waterfowl stamp.
They call it, a lot of times they'll call the duck stamp as the
duck stamp.
nickname.
Yeah, I think it's waterfowl specific. But and it is an actual postage stamp.
Yep.
That you buy, and then you have to sign it in black ink on the face of it to legitimize it, and then you can hunt waterfowl because they move from state to state. Obviously, they're federal, they're migratory, therefore they're federal. Where's that money go? So what's that all about?
Yeah, that's going.
'Cause that's $25, I think.
I know it's gone up a little bit.
That one's a good chunk. I always feel good about buying it, but
Well, that one goes. It doesn't go through our program.
Okay.
It actually goes towards federal funds, and so it's been a while since I've looked at that. But basically, it's looking at buying land and stuff for waterfowl, right? Yeah. So it actually goes towards federal property. So your national wildlife refuges would benefit from these purchases.
Yeah.
Which is a great. I mean, if you look across the country, I mean, we have over 500 some refuges and wildlife management water. As I said, it's been a long time since I've worked in that program. The Wetlands Management District. So there's 38 of those. There's 567 now. Wow. National wildlife refuges. Been going on for 116 years.
Wow.
95 million land acres.
Wow.
So that's just in that system. And then if you look at 740 million acres of submerged lands now. So you have out towards the Pacific Ocean and now the Atlantic. We have submerged lands that we actually protect as well.
Wow.
So there's some big chunks of land out there for us.
Yeah. Wow. Is it fair when I say to people, hey, if you want to participate, and you don't necessarily have to hunt or fish, but buying a hunting license or fishing license, that's a great contribution. Do you think that's fair to say to people, or you think it's something better for people who don't hunt and fish to do?
So, I mean, basically that money that you put in towards your license fee, like I said in the beginning, that money is guaranteed to stay in those state and wildlife agencies. Mm-hmm. So that money is not going to be used to do other things. Yeah. That's one of the great things about these acts. Mm-hmm. So, you just look at it that way, that money is going to the state agencies. And then the state agencies can use that money to help make their 25% match and bring in 75% federal funds. So there's definitely a benefit to it.
Yeah, by duck stamp. What's your kind of final thing you'd want to say to people about what you guys do and what they can do?
As far as what people can do, I mean, we work for the public, so make your voice be heard. We're never ashamed, to hear from everybody. We are trying to balance it. I look at wildlife management as, a balancing act, in this country. You can't, when I worked on sea turtles, what kind of point at me, more on the negative side is like, why don't you just save these turtles and then we don't have to deal with this anymore? And unfortunately,
as opposed to, I don't understand.
As opposed, they just want to get them off the endangered species list,
gotcha. Right.
So they want to remove them from the list, and we do too. We want to remove them from the list, but there is that balancing act of the needs of the economy, the needs of the public, to have their hotels and their economy. When I worked with endangered species, some people would always think, my job is just to save those animals, and actually it's more to meet the needs of the public, to try to balance that out. So that's the way I always saw myself, is trying to meet that middle ground, just like in nature. There's a balance, and we just try to keep that balance and try to preserve all of these species for everybody to enjoy.
It's a complicated job trying to balance ecology, habitat, species, and the economy, which tends to often be at odds with a lot of these things, not on purpose, of course, but by nature of what it is.
And like people's perception.
Yeah, and then oh God. Yeah. Which is like kind of an infinite spectrum
trying
of ideas.
Trying to keep everybody happy. It's the impossible job.
Would you say anything, like, let's say that you were just addressing, I know I kind of said, like, made that sound like we were wrapping it up, but I got one more question here. Yeah. If it was not the people who are, own hotels and beachfront property and things like that, but let's say it's millennials. They didn't grow up with as much access to the natural world. They and they're kind of they're becoming aware of they're going, how to say this, they're going to be the recipients soon of the world.
Yeah,
we're handing all of this stuff over.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? And I don't think that they understand sometimes, like, what's in place and what they have access to, how much land they actually own. Yeah. How many programs are out there to make sure that they continue to have access. Like, anything you would say, almost like to address the kids, like.
Well, I think I don't know. I used to kind of have that grim future, and now I'm becoming more hopeful, and I know that there was kind of that disconnect, right? And one of our, in Fish and Wildlife Service, especially in this region, like, we're trying to connect people with nature. I mean, we actually spend lots of energy, lots of money in urban areas like Philadelphia, John Hines. We're trying to get people in the community, young people out there, to really reconnect. Yeah. That's really important to our agency. It's really important to me. That's part of the reason that drove me is I grew up playing around national forest, just kicking around, hiking wherever. And I want that to be available for people in the future. And I've read a lot about, millennials. I'm right on that edge. I'm not a millennial, I guess. I don't know. Millennials don't like to be labeled anyway, so it doesn't matter.
I use the term, exactly. Yeah. I use the term broadly.
Yeah, but course. There's this new, I've been reading a little bit about Generation Z, which is actually the newer generation coming on. And they're actually showing that a lot of people are looking to reconnect with nature. They're looking to be outside. They want to be outside more. And I feel that there is this, a lot of the younger people out there are really desiring to be outside. And they might not know all the intricacies of, how this funding and the history of the hunting and all of that, but just them having that desire to be outside makes it so that the public thinks it's important to preserve our wildlife. And it'll happen, right? If people care enough, it will happen. And that's what happened in the 37. The hunters cared enough to have, species out there for them to be able to go hunt. So they cared enough, and they spoke up, and they got this act passed, and they collected money that they're basically paying. Kind of back then it was said the user pay, user benefit kind of model. And I think the younger people, I'm really hopeful.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
That I think more people are interested. I'm seeing younger people really interested in hunting. It's going to be a completely different way.
Yeah.
Right. Just some of them
that's
similar.
Okay. That's okay.
Similar
Things
to me,
change, right?
they don't care about how many points are on the antlers.
Right.
It's about meat or just being out in the environment, and people are acceptable of not harvesting that day, just enjoying the day.
Right.
If you look at the national survey, they actually showed in 2016 was when the data was collected, showed that 40% of Americans in this country enjoy outdoor recreation activities. That doesn't mean necessarily hunting. I think only a smaller percentage hunt. But that means that 40% of Americans care about the outdoors. So that's pretty good numbers. I mean, think about the competing things that are out there to do.
Right.
And the outdoors does, require some effort to get out there. But it's great. I mean, I'm inspired about, the newer generation coming over, and, we all make mistakes. Forgive me if I made one in this interview, but we all make mistakes, and, I think it'll be fine.
Yeah.
I hope when I'm retired, I can still continue to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And let all the younger people continue to maintain it.
Nice to hear how positive you are and how hopeful you are.
I know. Yeah. Now let's go to Cabela's. I think I'm going to buy some. I'm going to go contribute to the fund. Richard, thanks so much for your time today, man.
Yeah.
Great talking to you.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.